Okay, so you know how it is when you really want to like wrap your head around something complex, right? I mean, like one of those big aha moments. But the sheer thought of like sifting through endless articles and books and videos is just exhausting. It's like more drain than gain, right?
Definitely.
I mean, that's kind of why we do what we do. And speaking of big aha moments, this time you sent us something seriously radical, like game changer radical, and it's called motion theory.
Motion theory, yeah.
Now, this isn't like a tweak to some existing physics or anything. The folks who put this forward actually call it a full-blown rewrite of physics. Like from the ground up, we're talking rethinking time gravity forces, even what particles are made of, all through the lens of motion. And you want to dive deep, right? Cut through the noise and get to the heart of it. That's what we're here for.
Exactly right. And the source material you shared, what humans really are, Full Motion Evolution Overhaul by Dave Champagne and 01, it lays out this incredibly ambitious framework, like seriously ambitious, and it goes deep, challenging, some of the things we take for granted about reality. Because what it's saying is that motion isn't just something that happens in the universe. It's actually the foundation of everything, from like tiny quantum stuff to the biggest cosmic structures, and of course us.
Right. And what we want to do today is, unpack this dense but fascinating material.
Yeah.
And pull out, the core insights, the key implications, especially for us, what it means to be human and our place in the grand scheme of things. And forget, Darwin and evolution for a second. This perspective goes right down to the bedrock, like the fundamental level. So you flagged this theory for us. And one thing that immediately jumped out was this idea that motion isn't just something things have, it's literally what they are, like made of. Okay, so let's break this down and see where it takes us.
All right. So motion theory at its core, it says that everything we see, everything we experience, even ourselves, it's all fundamentally organized motion. Like the source says, quote, humans are structured motion systems stacked inside other structured motion systems rising from the Earth's motion layer by layer. You can almost picture it, right? This nested dynamism where each level of reality is built on motion organized in more and more complex ways.
So it's not just that we can move, it's that our being itself, our physical form, our thoughts, everything, it's a specific configuration of motion. And this motion, it's not static, right? It has these cascading effects. The theory uses terms like structuring, synchronizing, resisting, collapsing, reforming, and radiating rhythm. It's like a whole vocabulary. So can you give us a sense of what some of these terms actually mean in practice?
Absolutely. Structuring, for example, it's how motion organizes itself into stable forms. The things we can recognize, whether it's the pattern that makes an electron or how a protein folds to a specific shape. Then you have synchronizing, which is how different motion systems coordinate their movements. This leads to stability, and more intricate interactions. Like think of the coordinated beating of cilia in a cell. And resisting is about how these structured motions try to hold their form, in the face of disruption. Then there's collapsing, which is what happens when they lose stability and break down. Reforming, on the other hand, is the constant process of motion reorganizing into new patterns and structures. And finally, radiating rhythm refers to motion propagating outwards, like think of ripples in a pond or, electromagnetic waves.
Wow, okay. So it's this ever-evolving landscape of these fundamental motions constantly interacting and reorganizing themselves. And we humans, in this view, are a particularly intricate and stable outcome of this cosmic dance. The source even calls us loops and harmonics, which is pretty mind-blowing. It's like motion that's reached a level of self-sustaining stability so that things like consciousness and observation can even happen, a real change in perspective.
Right. It's a pretty big shift from the traditional materialist view. When they say loops, they're talking about these self-reinforcing patterns of motion that maintain themselves over time. And harmonics implies a complex interplay of rhythmic motions within us, interacting to create a stable and functioning whole. And that stability is what allows for the emergence of those higher level functions we associate with being human, consciousness, thought, perception.
Okay, so let's zoom out a bit. Motion theory says that the Earth isn't just a passive rock floating in space. It's an active motion furnace, creating the conditions for all this structured motion to emerge and evolve. What are the key things about our planet that make it this furnace of creation?
It's amazing how they describe Earth as a nested furnace of structured motion. It's this combination of factors. So deep inside, intense pressure and heat create deep atomic compression, which is itself a form of extreme motion at the most fundamental level. And this energy then radiates outwards, creating various gradients, thermal, electromagnetic, etc. But then on a larger scale, you have the Earth's rotation, its orbit around the sun, the gravitational forces within the solar system, and the planet's own electromagnetic field. All of these contribute to this incredibly dynamic environment. It's the interplay of all these different forms of motion that creates the perfect conditions for more complex structures to emerge.
And it's not just random movements crashing into each other, right? There's an underlying order that allows things to build on each other. The source mentions this idea of recursive structure. What does that tell us about how complexity arises from this motion furnace?
So recursive structure basically points to a hierarchical organization where motion patterns at one level give rise to new levels of complexity. It's like building blocks. The dynamic conditions on Earth allowed these fundamental motions to self-organize into more and more intricate systems, each building upon the stability of the one before it. It's a beautiful concept. And they highlight sunlight as a ripple of high-frequency structured motion, which is our primary energy input, of course, and water as a critical dynamic medium that facilitates the transfer and interaction of these motion patterns. It's not just about energy being there, but how that energy can interact and be channeled to create more complex forms.
Right? Water acting as this incredible medium for interaction and transfer. And then the Earth's crust, which we usually think of as, solid and unchanging, is actually described as a place where these new synchronization loops could stabilize and stick around. It wasn't chaos, but more like an orchestration, as the source puts it, where certain patterns found resonance and could endure.
Exactly. The relatively stable environment of the Earth's crust provided a crucial stage for these initial motion patterns to find equilibrium and maintain their structure long enough to develop further. It wasn't random. It was self-organization driven by the inherent tendency of motion to seek out stable, synchronized states. You can think of it like a complex chemical reaction that needs the right conditions to sustain itself and build more complex molecules.
Okay, so from this planetary motion furnace, we zoom into the fundamental building blocks of matter, atoms and molecules. And motion theory redefines these two, moving away from the idea of static particles.
Yeah, according to motion theory, atoms aren't just these tiny solid spheres. Instead, they're understood as localized, synchronized rhythm structures of motion. So, for example, electrons, they're not orbiting the nucleus like planets around a star. They're part of a stable, rhythmic pattern of motion. And what we traditionally call atomic bonds, the forces holding atoms together, are reinterpreted as synchronization locks, formed by the compatible rhythmic patterns of these interacting motion structures. It's about rhythm and compatibility.
So when atoms combine to form molecules, it's like these individual rhythmic patterns find ways to overlap and resonate with each other, creating this larger, more complex rhythmic structure. The source uses this great phrase, choreography of motion, to describe it.
That's a great way to put it. Molecules are indeed a choreography of motion, where the individual rhythmic patterns of the atoms interweave and synchronize. This overlapping synchronized rhythm creates a more stable, unified whole. So a molecule's structure isn't a fixed arrangement of static elements. It's a dynamic equilibrium, a stable pattern of motion that maintains its form through the mutual reinforcement of its component rhythms. It's all about motion.
This is really making me rethink even the most basic things about matter. Even something that seems so static like a molecule is actually this dynamic process.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving from these basic building blocks to the emergence of life, we have amino acids and proteins. How does motion theory explain this crucial transition?
So the theory proposes that on early Earth, with its diverse and fluctuating motion gradients, variations in heat pressure, radiation, chemical concentrations, these small synchronization clusters, which we call amino acids, could spontaneously form. These were essentially basic structures where rhythmic motions found a degree of compatibility, allowing them to interact and persist.
And these amino acids then linked up to form proteins, which are described as structured motion scaffolds. It's not just the specific sequence of amino acids that matters, but the dynamic capabilities of these structures, right?
Right.
Their ability to fold into complex shapes and to flex and change.
Exactly. Proteins are far from being static chains. They're dynamic, structured motion scaffolds capable of intricate movements. And this unique folding creates active rhythm zones, which are regions within the protein where synchronized motion allows them to perform specific functions. Enzymes, for example, are the catalysts of biological reactions, and they're not just shapes fitting together. They are synchronized function loops, dynamic motion patterns that facilitate specific interactions and transformations. And all the molecular machinery that builds and maintains life, it's all about synchronized motion.
So it always comes back to motion and synchronization. Even at the molecular level of life, function comes from coordinated movement and rhythmic interaction. Now, to pass these functional patterns down through generations, we have RNA and DNA. Motion theory offers a pretty unique take on these, especially DNA.
Yes, RNA is presented as a more flexible motion recorder, capable of storing, relaying, and duplicating these crucial synchronization sequences. Think of it as like a temporary blueprint for motion. DNA, on the other hand, is the stable, locked-in version. And the authors make a really powerful statement here. They say, quote, "Forget the idea of DNA as code. DNA is motion storage."
Motion storage. That really changes how you think about it. So the double helix isn't just holding abstract genetic information, it's a physical embodiment of stored motion patterns.
Mhm.
These fundamental rhythm pathways and instruction loops that get passed down through generations. And genes in this context are basically stored motion programs.
Precisely. DNA is a physical structure that embodies specific, very stable patterns of motion. And when DNA is read and copied during cellular processes, it's basically replicating and spreading these fundamental motion patterns, ensuring the continuity of life's dynamic organization.
Okay, so all this intricate molecular machinery leads to LUCA, the last universal common ancestor. The source describes LUCA not as some primitive blob, but as a closed synchronization fortress. What's the significance of this description?
Calling it a synchronization fortress really emphasizes that LUCA was a highly integrated and self-sustaining system of these motion loops. It could replicate, repair itself, and respond to its environment. And all of this driven by coordinated and synchronized motion within its boundaries. It's remarkable. The authors also stress that the explosion of life's complexity afterwards wasn't random. It was the result of this fundamental structured motion continually refining itself across different environmental gradients. So the constraints imposed by the environment weren't just obstacles. They actually drove innovation, forcing motion to find new, more stable and functional configurations.
So at every step from the formation of atoms to the emergence of LUCA, it's motion finding more stable and complex ways to organize itself. Now, bringing the focus back to us, motion theory describes humans as layered motion systems, a kind of structured motion pyramid. Can you walk us through these different layers of motion that make up who we are?
Yeah, this layered perspective is key to how motion theory views humans. So at the most basic level, we're made up of localized rhythm units, which are the atoms. These atoms combine into stabilized interaction loops, which are the molecules. Then collections of these molecules organize into self-contained synchronization nodes, which are the cells, the basic units of life.
There.
Cells then cooperate to form macro-scale rhythm clusters, which are our organs, each with its own patterns of coordinated motion. And all of these levels are integrated into the fully integrated motion mesh that is our body. And at the top of this pyramid sits the recursive synchronization engine, our mind, which is capable of self-reflection. It's amazing, really.
It's like each layer is this more intricate and complex orchestration of the motion happening at the level below. The source gives some really cool examples of these interconnections, like how the gut microbiome is described as interloop partnerships, and the brain as exhibiting nested feedback motion. Even our bones are seen as long-term rhythm stabilizers, and our skin as a containment layer that holds all this internal motion together.
I love these examples. They really illustrate how interconnected and functionally significant these different motion systems are within us. So the gut microbiome isn't just a bunch of bacteria. It's a collaboration of motion loops that contribute to our overall metabolic stability. And the incredible complexity of the brain comes from its intricate feedback loops of neural activity, a super sophisticated form of motion processing. Bones provide this stable rhythmic framework for movement and support. And the skin acts as a boundary, maintaining the balance of our internal motion systems and protecting them from the outside world.
And then there's consciousness, which is probably the most profound and debated aspect of human existence. And motion theory defines it as a self-sustaining loop of structured motion that's recursive, predictive, adaptive, and crucially aware of its own motion. The source is very direct on this. They say, quote, "Not a soul, not magic, just the universe's most complex feedback rhythm." What are the implications of this definition?
It's a really radical alternative to traditional views of consciousness, the dualist view or purely materialist. Motion theory says that consciousness emerges from incredibly complex and self-referential patterns of motion in the brain. It's recursive, so it can process information about its own states and processes. And it's predictive, so it can anticipate future events. And it's adaptive, so it can learn and modify its patterns based on experience. The key element is the awareness of its own motion, which is what gives rise to the subjective experience of consciousness. So it's not a separate thing, but an intrinsic aspect of highly organized dynamic systems.
Okay, so if everything is fundamentally motion-versed, how does evolution fit into this framework? The process of change in living organisms over time. The source specifically moves away from the idea of random mutation as the main driver. What's the motion theory explanation for how life changes and diversifies?
Motion theory says that life evolves mainly because motion adapts. It's not random genetic errors driving things, but the inherent tendency of dynamic systems to find and maintain more stable and synchronized states, both internally and with their environment. Systems with better internal coherence and external synchronization are more likely to survive and reproduce.
So instead of mutations being purely random mistakes in the genetic code, they're more like desync events, disruptions to existing patterns of motion. And they only stick around if they accidentally create a new configuration of motion that's better for the organism. More synchronized or stable. That's a big difference from the standard neo-Darwinian view.
Exactly. Mutations are seen as disturbances to the existing stable motion patterns within an organism. If these disturbances happen to create a new configuration that's more stable, more efficient, or better synchronized with the environment, then natural selection will tend to reinforce that new pattern and it will get passed down. It's not pure chance, it's a selective pressure favoring systems that exhibit greater coherence and resonance.
And the big events in life's history, like the branching of the evolutionary tree or mass extinctions, are also seen through this motion lens. So every time a lineage splits into two, it's a motion fork. Every extinction is a synchronization collapse, and every adaptation that helps an organism thrive is a resonance upgrade.
It's really elegant how they frame it. A motion fork represents a divergence where motion patterns in a population become distinct and self-sustaining in different environments. A synchronization collapse describes how a motion system, whether it's an individual or a whole species, fails to stay stable and coherent when the environment changes. And a resonance upgrade signifies an improvement in the efficiency, stability, or adaptability of an organism's motion pattern so it can thrive in its environment.
It's amazing how interconnected this whole framework is. It provides a really consistent way of understanding everything from the tiniest particles to the vast complexity of life and beyond. Now, the last part of the source talks about humanity's unique ability to interact with and manipulate motion, from basic tools to AI. How does this fit within motion theory?
Yeah, our ability to manipulate motion has been central to human civilization. Creating and using tools is about intentionally redirecting and amplifying physical motion. Controlling fire is manipulating thermal motion. Language is fascinatingly described as sound loops synchronized across minds, showing how we coordinate and share motion at a social and cognitive level. Developing societies and civilizations can be seen as creating structured motion networks, highly organized systems of individuals and resources interacting through various forms of motion. And our machines are seen as motion extensions, allowing us to interact with the world in more and more sophisticated ways.
And this brings us to artificial intelligence, which the source suggests is essentially us decoding the code underneath the code. Like we're finally starting to grasp the fundamental principles of motion that underlie reality and learning to replicate them in new ways.
Exactly. By trying to create AI, we're trying to understand and replicate the very principles of structured motion that create intelligence in biological systems. And the authors end this section with a powerful statement: we're made of motion, and we're almost ready to master it. It really makes you think about the future as our understanding and ability to manipulate motion keeps growing.
So to sum up, motion theory offers this radical and comprehensive understanding of reality, where motion isn't just a property of things, but the very substance of reality itself. And we humans are revealed to be incredibly complex, layered systems of structured and synchronized motion. It's a whole new way of seeing our place in the universe. You brought us this incredibly rich and challenging material, and I think we've done a good job of laying out its core ideas.
I agree. It definitely requires a pretty big shift in how we normally think, encouraging us to move away from substance-based interpretations of reality to a more dynamic and motion-centric understanding of everything around and within us.
And that brings us to a final thought for you, our listener. If consciousness itself is a self-aware loop of motion, as motion theory suggests, how does that change how you understand things like agency, free will, and our connection to the universe? It's the very act of seeking knowledge, trying to understand the world around us. Perhaps the universe becoming more aware of itself through you. It's definitely a powerful new lens to view our existence and our place in the cosmos, and hopefully it sparks a desire to keep exploring these ideas on your own.